Well, I haven't heard that much applause since my bat mitzvah, so thank you very, very much. And welcome. The name of my little talk is So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. No absolute guarantees, and with this crowd, I'm not sure that was the goal for everybody, but what I am going to do is I'm going to take you through my world of the last 40 years of photographing musicians, and all types of musicians. I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. I grew up in Rhode Island and went to school in Boston and stayed in Boston after graduating from college. I studied communication and education, and photography had always been a hobby of mine. When I was about 12 years old, my dad taught me how to develop my own film, and we had a enlarger in the spider room in the basement, and I learned how to print. And you know, for many of us, that was when the love affair began, but it was always a hobby. Being a child of the 50s, I never factored in that that could actually be something you did to, you know, make a living, so I got my teaching degree. But then I graduated college, and I started working. I worked through college in a camera store, and fast forward, I met a guy that lived in my building. He was a jazz musician, and fast forward, I moved to New York with him, and now we're in New York, and that is the quickest version I've ever had to getting to New York. So we were both very new, and I really didn't know anybody. He had a friend who was starting his own jazz label, and he asked my boyfriend at the time if he would go on the road with one of his artists, and that artist was Chet Baker. For those of you who don't know him, he was a famous horn player. Very handsome guy. He also sang, trumpet player, and played with some other things as well. So he had kind of a interesting life. Be that as it may, I was asked if I would take a picture of him. So my first assignment moving to New York, having never really had a real assignment, was shooting Chet Baker. And from there, I started shooting a few more people that were on his roster. And a music magazine that was out in Colorado was doing a story. The name of this jazz label was called Artist House, for anyone who wants any slightly deeper information on that. And they were doing a story about Artist House, and they used some of my photos. And that kind of led to, would you do some more photos for us? And that led to, we're moving to the East Coast, would you be our photo editor? So I was really lucky, and I became Musician Magazine's first photo editor. And what was so exciting about Musician Magazine was back then, and this is mid-70s, a little bit towards the end of it, the only real music magazines then were Cream, Rolling Stone, and a couple of others, but there wasn't a whole lot that were covering a wide range of music. And I tell you this because I was really lucky. I was lucky to be in on something that was happening in the beginning, but I was also lucky because I didn't shoot just rock and roll. I shot, this magazine was covering jazz, they were covering new age, they were covering everything. And so I really had an opportunity to work with so many different types of musicians. And you know, today everybody says specialize, and I was just really lucky because I was exposed to so many different types of music so that I could really focus and develop my own style. You know, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it will as we go on. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm backtracking a little because I don't write notes, is when I moved here, I didn't have a job or anything, but I had one friend, and she got me a job at Magnum Photo. And it was in the back room where when the photos went out to the magazines, and Magnum, for those of you that don't know, represented the world's finest photojournalists. But I was in the back room, so when the magazines wanted a photo by Cartier-Bresson, I opened up the envelope when it came back from the magazine and I logged it in. But what I really got was an education. I was holding these photographs and sitting there longer than they would have liked just looking at them. And some of the people there, actually, some of these guys, you know, were shooting jazz at the same time. So it was a very exciting, short-lived period for me, but it really was my photo education. You know, I had taken 2 classes at school, but photo 1 and photo 2. But I wasn't, you know, I didn't major in it, and it was just what I saw, what I liked, what was interesting to me. It was a very much of a solo journey, if you will. So then I had a little internship, and between that at the Village Voice, I was shooting for Artist House, or maybe it was Musician, and they said, Johnny Griffin's in town. He's been an expatriate for all these years. He's going to be on 57th Street and 5th Avenue. You need to go there. So I get there, and I'm shooting alongside this other photographer, James Hamilton, who was a staff photographer for the Village Voice. And he said, you know, they have an internship there. So this is, again, late 70s. So life was incredibly exciting for me at this point in my life. Shooting for Musician, got an internship at the Village Voice. But it was all sort of just by chance, you know, just by being friendly, by meeting people. And, you know, it kind of changed my world around. And no surprise, I moved out of that apartment with the jazz musician and got my own little tiny studio. And that could be like a great segue into the slideshow. So this is the cover of my book. And what I've done, as opposed to the book, is I thought you'd find it interesting to go through this chronologically. So my first shots all the way to the end, and then I have some outtakes. So this is my first shot, and this I shot actually in Boston. And I shot each of these in Boston, but they are merged together. And they are not related, but this is Betty Carter and Ron Carter. And this, I was, you know, a lot of the photos back in the 70s of jazz musicians, the ones that I was exposed to and the ones that I saw were those classic 50s lit studio shots. And I loved them. And I was really inspired by the shapes and the timing and the lighting and the movement. But the more I started spending time with musicians, I started thinking how they're always shot in the dark. And I wanted to shoot them outside of this. And I started looking around. You know, we didn't have Google, so it was really hard to find images of, you know, jazz musicians, you know, a wide variety. But I found a book of this one man, Giuseppe Pino, and he was doing what I really wanted to do. He was a bit more of a journalist. He was an Italian photographer, and he was shooting jazz musicians out of the studio in the real world, and it was very inspirational for me. This is my Chet Baker photo. This was my first photo assignment in New York City. And you'll hear me say this a lot, but I was really nervous. Now at this point, I only know how to use black and white film, and there's no digital back, so there's always the fear, did I expose it right? You know, we used a hand meter, or I never really used my camera meters. But at this point I had a Nicker mat, which if you remember back then was like solid steel and really heavy, exactly. And I was shy, and he was very, very quiet. And it was a photo session that went like this. Okay, could you sit over there now? Okay, would you go over there? I mean, I just kind of moved him from location to location. But I remember that when I put him in this little space, I could sense then, which maybe all of you can, that something special had happened and was transpiring. So when I handed all the film in, they asked me, you know, so did you shoot some color? And I mention that now because I didn't shoot any color. I didn't know how to expose for color, but you'll see what I did later on in my outtakes. So that's 1977. Sorry about that. So the next shot is one of my early assignments from the Village Voice. And this is a gentleman named Fab Five Freddy. And he was he started on MTV, which came a little bit later. I think music videos, I think it was Yo MTV. And he wanted to stand behind this mural by Lee Quiros. I'm not sure if I've said that right. But he was hanging out with a group of muralists back then, and I had to get permission for all the photos in the book. So not only, I just want to, I'm sort of jumping around a little bit, but I think it's interesting. Most of my shoots were editorial. I owned all the film. They were mine. I shot for a magazine. They used the photo. All the rights reverted back to me. But in doing the book, I had to get permission from the muralist as well, which was so fabulous because then we went out to lunch and it was very exciting and we talked old school. It was fabulous. But this was one of my earliest photos for the Village Voice. Okay, now we're up to 1979, and this is James, well, I guess y'all know this is James Brown. This was interesting. So it's 1979, and it's not the early 70s, it's the end of the 70s. Photographers aren't really going on the road anymore and hanging out. Now what's happening in the music industry when I'm starting is they've got a record coming out and they've called like a press parade, my word for it. So you're showing up at the record company and you're with your writer and you're waiting for your turn and you're waiting in line to go in for your 15 minutes. And that's going to come up a lot in a lot of my photos. So we go in, it's our turn, and I'm not allowed to speak to him. I can take my photos and shoot while he's having his interview with the writer from musician. So I do that, and that was that. A couple of years ago, I'm re-editing my film thinking, you know, I gotta find some surprises occasionally, and I come across this. And this is not due to old age, I don't think. I had no memory of ever taking this photograph, which I can now tell a story that I don't remember. And that story is that I followed him out the door and onto the street and took that shot. And what I love about that is I've always been more laid back than, you know, pushing forward. But I love that I must have been a little bit more pushy then, because I really don't remember taking that, and it is now one of my most favorite shots. Okay, so this is George Clinton from, again, 1979, Musician Magazine. And this is a conference room shot. So what I want to speak about on that is, you know, and it does reflect to the title of this. I mean, again, whether you want to be a rock and roll photographer or whatever you want, whatever kind of photographer you are or you want to be, anything I say is going to apply to it because that's just who I am. And you know, it's that, to be obnoxious, you know, making lemons out of lemonade. You know, it's always about pushing yourself harder. Okay, so the party started before I got there. I'll admit that in this sense. But did I put the pillows up there? I might have. I don't really remember. But it was like, how do I make this not look like what it is? This is all they gave me. How do I make it bigger? And I can always remember, saying to myself, those days passed when you went on the road, so what are you going to do, girl? How are you going to make this yours? How are you going to own it? And there's a number of shots. I went close in, I went further back, but what I didn't want you to know was that I was in a conference room. And I have to tell you that it still applies no matter what I shoot today. I don't want, no excuses is what I'm saying. You got to make the best of it. You got to make it work. You got to push. Okay. Oh, goody. Here's one I love. So this is Prince, 1980. And this is one of my favorite stories and photographs because what I tell you about it, again, still holds true today. So this is a great story. So the Soho Weekly News, which was an alternative to the Village Voice, calls up and asks me, we got this musician in town, he's from Minneapolis, this is his first time here, there's a lot of buzz about him, we want you to go to the bottom line and shoot him while he's performing. I'm like, okay, because I did a lot of performance shooting too. And I mean, everybody did. You did whatever you were asked to do, and happily. And it was fun, and there was always the same group of people at that time shooting, and everybody was really good to each other. It wasn't an aggressive scene at all. You shared poles to stand in front of. It was a great venue, the bottom line. Sorry that it's not there anymore. But then he says to me, yeah, and we want you to ask his manager when you get there if you can take a picture of him backstage. And I'm like choking, and I'm like, really? Because I wanted them to do that for me. I, again, was still a little bit reserved, still the girl from Rhode Island. I loved when you told me, be there at a certain time. I didn't like when they said, now you go figure out how to get it. So I go backstage, I knock on the door, and the big guy answers it, and in a very high-pitched voice, I ask if I can, I'm from the Soho Weekly News, and they want me to take a portrait, if I could, backstage of Prince. He's like, no, Prince doesn't do that. And you could have felt the breeze. Okay, thank you. And I run back to my pole. Opening band comes out, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I'm like, turn around. And it's that same guy, and he signals to me, and he tells me to go backstage with him. And he says to me, you were so nice about that. Come on in and take a few photos. Now I'm really scared. So the room is, seriously, it's like this twice. And as you can see, there's a couch and there's a sink. And there's me, and there's him. And I'm not really good with on-camera flash, and I'm really nervous. I shoot off a half a roll of film, again, and put your knee in, okay, and didn't really have a whole lot in common to talk about. I'm pretty quiet. And then I just say to him, I've run out of positions and movements, and I just say, well, would you like to take a picture of me? And we'll come back to that later, okay? And that was the end of it, and that's the last frame. And now we're moving forward. We've hit 1980. And what I loved shooting most was my jazz guys. And what I loved was shooting them out of, the dark, dank clubs. And he invited me to his home, and this is where I shot that. The thing I want to say is, I don't know if it's because I wasn't schooled, I didn't study, there wasn't one person whose work I liked. I was affected by so many different influences, but I was mostly affected by the jazz world. And that is what I started shooting. I didn't put a lot of that in, but their whole world of improvisation turned my world around. I didn't know what it was like to be loose. I didn't know what it was like to take a chance. I grew up in a generation and in a time that was pretty conservative. I almost said how old I was, but I'll just say class of '69. But you know, it was a more conservative approach, especially within my family, to life. And then I meet these jazz musicians, and they tell me it's okay not to save the world. It's okay to enjoy what you do. It was okay to take a risk. I'd never heard that in my life, and it stays with me to this day. One of the things I loved doing was like shooting while they were playing, you know, and then in my mind imagining that we were trading, you know, we were going back and forth, and maybe we were. But that was my inspiration, and of course my love of photography. But what I knew of photography was more from getting Life magazine as a child. You know, it was those beautiful black and white images. So the world was really open and free for me. And especially in music photography, you know, the world of Annie didn't really enter that much into my world, and if anything, we were encouraged to be very different. So there was a lot of freedom. I felt a lot of freedom. And, you know, this was part of that journey, was just, I loved whenever I got a jazz musician. My work will change, and you'll see that as we go along, but we're not there yet. Okay. So I get an assignment to go to Alabama to shoot the rhythm section, Muscle Shoals. This is 1980. And, you know, the rhythm section, as we all know, is providing that backbeat, that bottom sound for the performer. And I never thought about that until I was interviewed yesterday, and that's what someone said, why they liked this so much. But for me, work was just always very organic. I mean, I couldn't sit here or stand here and pace and tell you why I did this. It just felt right at that time. I will tell you that I'd never seen kudzu before, which is an overgrown growth, and I was, you know, in the South, and it was a little stimulating for me, but I don't know. I'm not that deep that I like had layers of thoughts behind my images. They were often just kind of came and then sometimes left as quickly as they came. Okay, we're still in 1980, everybody. I don't know if we can tell by the clothes, but this was two producers that I actually photographed a lot. I did a lot of work in some recording studios, and again, wanting to get them outside on the street. This is, I guess, 57th Street or thereabouts, and it's just a moment, you know. Those were some of the, like I said, I put a lot of thought and feeling into it, but it was okay to just do something a little looser and easier and just a snapshot. Okay. Okay, U2 has arrived, and I've been asked to shoot the band on their first trip over from England. This is 1981. This is Bono. And this is an interesting story. It's my first real band photo shoot. And I'm living in a 325 square foot room above, well, it was on Greenwich Avenue above the ACE 1, 2, and 3 lines. So when I would speak to people on the phone, they thought I was on the street. But it was my very first own place, and it was very special to me. And the bathroom I had converted into a dark room when I wasn't using the shower. And I was just kind of living and breathing all of this now. So I'm pretty nervous. It's my first assignment to shoot an entire band for a major label. That said, I'm mostly shooting daylight, and I realized that morning that it's cloudy out and these pictures aren't going to come out. I don't know how to use strobes. I don't own strobes. So I kind of just stay focused for a minute. 4 doors down's a hardware store. I go and I buy one of those reflectors, you know, that you paint with, and I put a 100-watt bulb in it, and that's what I got. So I've always, again, you know, I didn't come into this where I went, I think I'll be a photographer, and made a little shopping list. You know, as I grew and as my wallet grew, I would buy one lens. Like at that point, I had a 50mm lens for my Nikkormat, and that was it. And I would just buy as my world went up, my inventory slightly expanded. But I've always shot very minimally. And again, this is still same old Nikkormat, 35mm with a painter's reflector and a light bulb. What I like about this was, I think he was about as experienced as I was in terms of just the camera and what to do and how to pose, and I'll just show you a few more. You know, I think he cleaned his act up a little bit more after this, but I personally just love looking at these. So this is a young Bono. Okay, now we're still in 1981. This is Brian Eno. This is from Musician Magazine, and this is what I was speaking about later, that I was really lucky that I was covering so many different types of music. And I was not that familiar with his music, but what he does, he sort of coined the term ambient music. And this will not be a music lecture, you can just Google what that is. But it's very minimalist. And I got there and he lets me in, and it's very, he's busy working on a video, and he's editing and he's editing and he's editing, and I got pictures of the video and all that. And finally I take a walk outside, and he was on the rooftop in his penthouse apartment in Soho. And it's just like this tar everywhere you look. You know, it's the shingles, I guess, of the top of a building. And I just sort of did my interpretation of his type of music. And the best part was, nobody could say, why'd you make him so small? Where are you? You know, it was, again, I was working with people that encouraged you to not think about what someone else was thinking about, but to really shoot for yourself. So I'm going to let you all hear my Cranston, Rhode Island accent, because this is the Cars. It's 1981. And I just saw a mirror, as we like to say in Cranston, and had someone hold it. And this was a publicity shoot. This was actually a cover for a musician. But, you know, this was still very much in line with, I don't know, it was there, it looked interesting, it was good. This is Johnny Copeland, blues musician. I had the pleasure of photographing him a number of times. Lovely, lovely gentleman. His publicist walked around Harlem with us, and she brought the album and the guitar, so we used it. That's still 1981. And this was my very first session with Branford and Wynton Marsalis. I ended up shooting them quite a bit over the years, and it was always a pleasure. And they were just starting their careers as well. And this was an outtake from a publicity photo shoot for their record company. Sometimes I don't know about other people, but I don't know why I like something, but I just always have liked this shot. Let's see where we are. Okay. This is Dr. John, 1982. And this is like a real aside, but I love telling this story, but he was renting Anthony Perkins' house at the time, this apartment. And I don't know why that's meaningful, except that it was kind of spooky. And I never really saw that cat till after I developed it. But between the hole in his shirt and the cat, I just really liked that photo. I have a lot of others, but I'm the editor, so I picked this one that I like. Okay. Philip Glass. Again, a bit more of the new age music. Again, a bit of minimalist. When I'm shooting him, I'm thinking about that, you know. Made the decision to not show all of his face, which was embraced, which was fine. Had the pleasure of working with him a number of times. Always a striking subject. Okay. This is Mal Waldron, still in 1982. Jazz musician. He was Billie Holiday's last piano accompanist. I was asked the question yesterday about, which this is going to sound interesting, weird, but he said, did they mind that you had smoke in his eyes? Again, I never really thought about it, you know, and never really saw it that clearly until he asked me that question yesterday. You know, for me, this photo wasn't just about, you know, it was about the shape, the time, the connection, and the smoke that's in his eye that I'll probably never forget.
He looks like a ghost in his eye.
Yes, he does. And this is Dwight Twilley, a little bit of country western coming my way. And I don't really have a story to tell on this, but for me, what I can share with you, that what I see is just the many influences of the different types of photography that I liked. And at this point, I'm starting to look at some British photographers, which did a really nice job on that kind of grainy daylight, and can see a little bit of that influence in my work there. So, okay. All right, everybody ready? Here we go. So I don't know how it happened, but this image has really lasted throughout the years. And it was really a very, very innocent photo shoot. It's 1982, and she's getting a lot of buzz, and I'm a really big fan. So I start calling all my friends that are editors of the different magazines and asking if I can do a photo shoot with her. So this is the second time in my career that I've ever called up and, you know, solicited, asking, trying to shoot someone. And so a magazine called Star Hits said, sure. I don't even think they ever ran it. But at this point, I've moved up. Now I'm in a 500 square foot apartment, studio apartment. And in this apartment, all my furniture folds. My dining room table folds, my bed folds, my chairs fold. So by the time she walks in, there's a nice black seamless with a light behind her. I think I was really focused on her covering that light, you know. And she walks in and it looks like a photo studio for the most part. She came in with her publicist. She was made up, ready to go. My light was set, a very simple light, an umbrella, because that's all I used then was umbrellas. And I even remember there were Dynalights, and she's got that light behind her with the reflector and some diffusion, because I liked that glow, and my assistant had worked with someone who did that kind of backlighting. I'm like, oh, show me how to do that, and we set that up. And Madonna and I shot. It was a Hasselblad, so I did 4 rolls of film, just 2 working girls, working at it for 20 minutes. I served a bowl of bubble gum and lollipops. They have no explanation why. There was no food budget, I don't know. But, and then she left as quickly as she came. And every frame is beautiful. In every frame, she changed her expression and her body. And I just kind of, like I've talked about earlier with the jazz, I just kind of danced with her, moved with her. And there was no conversation. And after 20 minutes, she got up and left. And that's my story. Well, the story is that it's become a very popular photograph called that's been sort of called the Lollipop series, but that's the story behind it. Al Green, 1982. This is another one of those assignments where he's rehearsing for a Broadway show, and I'm allowed to shoot while he's rehearsing. But it sort of goes with what I spoke about before, where you just make it work. I don't want people, for me, for this particular one, I did not strip this out. I do very little post-production, and I can tell you that no heads have been moved or harmed in these photographs. Everything is as it was. Because that's sort of what I grew up on, and that is the way I still shoot, is you won't hear me say, oh, we'll fix that later. I'm old school, I still like to get the exposure right. I still like to have it all there and figure it out and keep my brain going. I'm not as interested in sitting at a computer. And it's not a judgment, it's just not as interesting for me. And it took so long to learn everything. I got to still keep that going. But in this one, I was able to shoot and position him at such a time where I had a white wall behind me. And I like this shot. Okay. Billy Joel. Billy, 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 Billy. I learned a lot about this photo session about 6 months ago. Now, I shot it in 1982, but I was recently writing about this photo shoot, and I had an epiphany. And the story goes like this. I think it's my first cover for Musician magazine. He's really big, it's 1982. I go to his house by myself in Oyster, I don't know, someplace in the middle of Long Island. And it's just the two of us, and now I've brought my Normans, portable lights that I don't know how to use, and I'm shooting Kodachrome. And he's like not that interested in really doing anything. And I just remember stressing so hard on that shoot. And it's the first sort of real star that I've shot. It's a different caliber at this point. I mean, because Madonna, there was no comparison at that point. And I was so hard on myself, and I never really liked the photos that I took, and he looks bored to me, and I wanted him to be a superstar. And I came to realize that recently, that he was relaxing, he was home, that people don't know this side of him. But as the people that were sort of, he was such a higher profile, and I thought that I was supposed to be doing something bigger than this. But I have forgiven myself for this, because I actually think I did a great job, and I showed a side of him that people wouldn't ordinarily see. But it was just interesting to me in going back and thinking about it, that I kept expecting him to do something, and I kept trying to get him to do something, but sometimes you don't really have to do that. Sometimes it's right in front of you. And if you don't stay in the present, you can get lost. And it's a good lesson. It was for me. Another one of my jazz guys. I really liked coming in close with people And I do have a lot from all my shoots of coming in really, really tight. And I was lucky that people let me do that, that there was a trust. I worked with Don, this is Don Cherry, 1982. I worked with him a lot. This is one of my favorite photos. This is Todd Rundgren, 1983. This was at his recording studio. This is something that I picked for my book that I'd never really enlarged before, but just sort of, looked at, and I just kind of liked this. I'm not sure if it was the hangers or the plant, but it worked for me. And here we have Joey Ramone from the Ramones. So this was an interesting pairing of shooting the Ramones, me shooting the Ramones, because I wasn't really, it was a publicity photo shoot, 1983 as I said, and I wasn't that into punk music or that scene. So what I sort of like about this shot in retrospect was I think I'm the only person that ever shot them in a studio setting. And it's not evident here, but I have pictures of him smiling too. So it was sort of a nice mixture of, like a nice mix and match. And they were kind enough to oblige me with this very formal setting. I have some outtakes I'll show you later where we break it up a little bit. This is a blues musician, Stevie Ray Vaughan. This is 1983. And I was living in Greenwich Village most of my career at the time, and at this particular time. So we just packed up his suitcase and took a walk from my studio to the West Side Highway. And at the time, there was an installation called Art on the Beach. And we just kind of took some photos around that. There's not much more to say about all of that, with the towers behind it and all that. But to just go beyond that, I didn't ever feel like I had to explain why I took something. I had to explain later, but I didn't have to explain then why I took a picture. So, here we have Boy George at the record company in the conference room and trying to make it look like it's my studio. But for the book, I chose this one just to pull back to give a little more of what it was like, quickly setting up my own little portrait studio for my 15 minutes with a band. Tom Verlaine from the band Television, and this was up on where the High Line is now. It was all very derelict back then, and I used to take artists up there and just shoot in various places. This is obviously all gone now. Okay, 1983, things are changing. Rolling Stone just asked me to go on contract with them. And we're going to see some style changes coming up now. So this was, he's wearing his suit from David Byrne, Burning Down the House. And I have a lot of photos where he's holding the house and he's got his jacket off and he's got his jacket on, and it's all going really great, except that his face never changes. And for me, it's the same picture time after time. And for me, it wasn't enough that he had a big coat on. I don't know that I tell this story well, but when I was in college in Photo 1, my teacher somehow arranged for the Canadian portraiturist Joseph Karsh to come to our class. And I was so excited to show my photos, and I thought I was better than everyone else in the class. And I said, oh, I'm going to go first, for the critique. And I showed him a series of pictures of children that I'd photographed. So fast forward, what I learned is never go first, because they judge you really harshly, and they don't know what's coming after you, so you might have been the best, but they raise their standard when you start, and sometimes it gets a little lower. Lesson number one. Lesson number two, what he said to me, I have never forgotten. And he's like, it doesn't matter what picture you take. A picture of a child's going to be interesting on some level, or charming, or whatever. So for me, what I got from that was, it's a big suit. So that it's already interesting. But it wasn't interesting enough for me. And I didn't want what he was wearing, I didn't want the prop to overtake the photograph. So what I did was, I played a game of Simon Says with him. And this is something that I've done before, that wasn't my first time. And this is a way I've worked with people that are uncomfortable or stiff or don't want to be there. And I do a little, I know it's going to sound very juvenile, but that's me. It would be, okay, smile. Simon says, smile. Look happy, look sad. And then one of them was, give me a silent scream. And that was his interpretation. Jackson Browne, 1983. This was a cover for Musician Magazine. We got the call the night before. They wanted my assistant and myself to drive to Worcester, Massachusetts. He was going to be performing in a big venue, big auditorium, and we were to meet him at his hotel at 8 in the morning and do the cover in an inside shot. So we get there at 8 o'clock, we drive all night, get to the hotel, it's 8 o'clock, and his, advanced person is like, nah, he's not ready. So we waited from 8 to 6 o'clock at night. And we watched him sit by the pool, have his lunch, go swimming. And, every 2 hours, yeah, not yet, not yet, not yet. And, you're running on adrenaline. At this point, we're like, So I'll come to the venue. He'll do it before he goes on stage. So it's 8 o'clock at night. We go get to the venue. They don't leave our name there. It takes forever to get ourselves in. We find a little space behind the men's room, set up my little canvas. And he comes over. I take about 3 frames, and his manager says, yeah, you got 1 minute. I got nothing at this point. So I have this blue box. It was a blue music anvil case that I went everywhere with me. And it fit, 1 dynamite and 2 heads. And I stood on it. It's made out of wood. And I'm a little short. And I used it all the time. And I'm standing on it. And I'm backing off a little bit, to get a little further back. And I fall off of it with my Hasselblad. And I realize I have a very important decision to make at that time. And I make the decision to cry. Yes. But what I really made the decision to do, and it was very deliberate, was to get his attention. And I remember saying, as if it was yesterday, I'm not crying because I hurt myself. I'm crying because I can't go any faster. And it worked. I got his attention. He saw me as a crying girl, but he saw me as a person who was, I think, trying to do a job, and he put his arms around me, which I really loved. And he said, come back after the show and I'll give you everything you want. Well, photo-wise. And we'll talk about that another lecture. But, just kidding. But that was a very deliberate decision to make myself vulnerable, because I didn't know how to get this shot. And going back without it just wasn't going to work. And it was never my nature to be aggressive. You know, like, hey, listen, you know, we've been waiting for 8, and that wasn't going to ever happen. So that's my story. Okay. Annie Lennox, 1983. This was the Eurythmics. I know for most of us it was a very exciting time musically. And this is in my apartment, the one where everything folds, window light, Hasselblad. And no, I didn't ask her to put her hands up like that, but I did shoot it. Okay. And then sometimes you don't always make a connection with your subject. So this is Elvis Costello, 1983, shot about 2 rolls. Never really thought I had anything from this shoot until I was preparing the book and found this and kind of fell in love again with it, or fell in love with it. Boy, we're still in the early 80s. 1983, Peter Gabriel, record company shoot, conference room, only you know what? Go outside the window. You know, always finding a new way to do something. And there was a deck. I wasn't hanging on the window. But he was a great person to shoot, very much like a jazz musician, very much, you know, improvising, moving. How did that happen? Absolutely no idea. It just happened. I shot it. We were obviously working together. Me at my best, my happiest. Okay, I gotta get us out of the 80s. Okay, Billy Idol. So Billy Idol, again, wasn't that much into knowledgeable about his music. So when I said, I don't know, could we maybe get a little action in the shot? And I encouraged him to like move his cape. The next frame is my lights falling down because the cape hit the lights. My lights exploded, and I guess he was embarrassed and he walked off and he left. That was the end of that shoot. End of story. So this is 1 second before that happened. Okay, Spinal Tap, 1984. You know, this was a little bit of that same Josef Karsh story. They were pretty interesting without any props, but I shot them, or you stand here, you stand there, you stand here, and then took a break for 5 minutes. It was a rental studio, and started opening closets, found the utility closet, brought out everything in it, and that was that shot. Tina Turner, conference room shot. Same story as the other conference room shots. At this point, I'm doing a little more 2 1/4, a little more still using the Hasselblad, a little more familiar with lighting, starting to enjoy it, enjoying the color. Still staying connected with the subjects though. My technique's not overriding my imagery. Echo and the Bunnymen, 1984. Johnny Lydon. This was in his hotel room. I had brought a little backdrop with me because I'd shot a lot in hotel rooms. You know, again, you just have a little bit of time. And made the decision before I went that I wanted to do something close because he had such a great face and teeth. And wanted to just focus on this part of him with the little amount of time that I had. And then, well, we did add the water from the bathroom, the tears. That was a little collaboration on both parts. This is John Sebastian, 1985, Lovin' Spoonful. Took a walk in the village. He was friends with the owners of the guitar store, and I thought it'd be fun to just pop in there. B.B. King, 1985. B.B. always a delight to shoot, always happy. Shot with him a number of times. This is, I think this was a proper studio shoot. And then this is for Rolling Stone. This is Eddie Van Halen and Valerie Bertinelli, shooting a little more in the studio. Again, just sort of winging it, had a lot of fabric, just no real explanation for this, but fun. This is REM, Rolling Stone. You can see there's a little bit of style change happening. But for me, I was just learning different ways of shooting. Like, I'd never really shot flash outside. Still not really good at it, but kind of just picking and choosing and playing around. Yeah, that was that. This is 1985, Tom Waits, Jim Jarmusch. They had just finished working together on a film, and Rolling Stone asked if I would take a picture of the two of them. We met in Tompkins Square Park. I shot 4 rolls of film, and they never left the bench. Shot the band Aerosmith for the record company, Joe Perry, Steven Tyler. I kind of liked shooting them in a more classical way, shooting kind of the rockers or punk. So this was an outtake from their publicity shoot. This is Robert Fripp, 1983, King Crimson. Again, in my studio, very simple, very graphic. This was a publicity shoot. This is a replacement. It's 1985. I did not have a prop stylist. This was on the side of the tracks. And it was just there. So we used it. And that was their publicity photo. This is Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, backstage before a concert. He was the one musician I actually got to spend some time with, went on the road with for a little bit. I have another story coming up on that. And Beastie Boys, 1986. Okay. It's sort of blackened out, but this was Robert Cray, and this is 1987, shot this in Providence, Rhode Island, and I started fooling around with some high-speed Ektachrome films that were short-lived, but was kind of wanting to get out of the studio and a little more playful with my film and my camera and kind of go back to the way I started. So this was the film where you could push it like 3 stops, and it was really sad the day they stopped making that. Chrissy Hine, more studio work, 1987. Rolling Stone was the client. Kid Creole and the Coconuts, 1987, publicity photo shoot for their record company. Mick Jagger, 1987. And this was really an outtake from the shoot. I was doing a very brief photo shoot for his record company, and it was a very, very, you're not often like a major fan. Like, major fan, really nervous. Everything was going really, really well. This was for a solo album that he was doing. And I'm shooting, everything's going great, the music's going, he's dancing, he's moving, and then my flash explodes. And you're always really nervous when that happens because you can't always go back to where you were. You can't always go, take a shot and then try to recapture that shot. And I was panicking. So, I was telling my assistants what to do behind me and to fix it and kind of keeping an eye on him while he stayed on the set that we had created. And out of the corner of my eye, I caught that while he was just resting in between. And we fixed the light, and he did go back and got right back into his groove. Okay. This is LL Cool J, 1987, Rolling Stone magazine. And people have asked me, did I set that up? I don't know if I should be complimented or, if that's a compliment. But no, I didn't set it up. I carved a space for him and for me. But this was in his grandma's basement, and I'm a very neat, organized person. I got lightheaded when I went down there. And, the only thing I could think to do was get a ladder and just shoot down. There was nothing I could do about this. I didn't bring the fan there, the popcorn, I didn't bring anything. We drove to his grandma's house, we went down the basement, and I carved a little space for myself. And I really wanted to get up higher, but I only, on the Hasselblad, I just had that 80 millimeter, it was as high as I could get, my neck's on the ceiling. But no, I didn't set it up. Did I plug the fan in? Maybe, okay. Paul Schaefer, 1987. Met him in Gramercy Park. While I'm walking to where I'm supposed to meet him, I see that there's a store called, a restaurant called Paul's Lounge. And I'm like, Walk by an antique store, run in, ask if I can borrow a chaise lounge, met Paul, and brought him over and took the photo. '88, Frank Zappa. I'll be honest, not a love connection between us there. But you use it, you work with it, it was a little confrontational. I felt I wanted to show that. I was a little nervous about it, but he didn't walk out, he stayed. But when I look back at that, I can remember that day. It worked out. Okay, Cyndi Lauper, 1988. She came to my studio, we were doing a cover from Ms. Magazine. She had some bizarre outfit on, we shot her against white, all the hair and makeup, everything. As she was leaving and put her clothes on, I said, could I just take a picture of you outside my studio just as you walked in? And so that's who I saw. And I love that. And that's one of my favorite photos. Because who she was when I was shooting for the cover of Ms. was not the same person that walked in. And so I felt I was able to capture my impressions of her without her posing. This was for Rolling Stone, Leonard Cohen, Suzanne Vega. It was a story on mentors, and they had asked Suzanne who she would like to be photographed with, and she said Leonard Cohen. And the night before the shoot, I just gave a lot of thought to how I would do this. And that's sort of what I came up with. This was something that I'd thought about the night before, about passing, someone's influence. And I just wanted him to hold her head. So that was one of the few times I actually thought about what I wanted to do on a shoot, quite specifically. This is Sinead O'Connor, it's 1990, Rolling Stone. I'm asked to fly to Montreal to do a picture of her, and it's in a hotel room. And I've got my lights, and I've shot her before, so I'm doing a little small talk with her, and I ask my assistant to plug in the lights. Let's get ready, I'm gonna shoot her over here. And he taps me on the shoulder and he says, I forgot the AC cord. And he's not a funny guy, so I know he's not kidding me. And you can't lose that connection. I can't let her see that I'm completely freaking out. And I just do that thing, I remind myself, and I just realize I'm just going to shoot the whole thing daylight. It's a very, very long exposure on that. But, it's a shoot that I really like because I wouldn't have thought to have done that without it. And yet it's one of my favorite shoots. So it was like I was on a tripod. It was a long, long exposure. So I actually always like when there's an accident. I like figuring out a problem. In fact, I actually love that. And so I don't focus so much on him not bringing the cord, but how I was able to improvise and come up with something that for me was very strong. Ooh, Yoko Ono, 1990. I'd worked with her a few other times, and very quiet, lives in the Dakota, and a very quiet woman. And she said I could look around and shoot in any of the rooms I wanted to, which was very unusual for anybody to say that. And I saw this room, and I just thought it was so striking. And she said to me that she had actually, at that point, had never been photographed in there before. So, all daylight, and it was a special moment for me as a photographer. Publicity photo shoot, shot that outside in the California sun, Pat Benatar, 1993. Amy Mann, 1993. And I think at this point I'm shooting 4:6 now. I think I've got my Mamiya now, which was a little bit of a change from the Hasselblad, but I embraced it. I liked changing things up a bit. Mary J. Blige, 97. And 2000, Keith Richards. And this was shot in his home. This was an assignment that came from a British magazine, and they asked me to shoot him holding the album that had influenced him the most. So I did that, and then I took the album away and did some of these, and then I finished that story in a little bit. Alicia Keys, 2002. This was just at the start of her career. We met at her mom's apartment. We all piled in my car and went to Central Park. This is Pharrell, 2003. Shot this for a men's fashion magazine. Boz Scaggs, 2012. This was for his, this wasn't for the album, shot this for his album cover, but this wasn't the cover. This was one of the publicity photos that we used. And this was the only other photo. This was last year, Questlove, where I approached an artist and asked if I could take his picture. So. Had about 15 minutes. He came to, met me in a little small studio. And my favorite slide, it's either takeout or outtakes. And there's a reason why I'm not a graphic designer, because I just thought that was just fabulous. So, do you remember when I was talking about the Chet Baker photograph, and I didn't know how to shoot color? So what's a girl do? She hand colors her photographs. So I handed that in as my color. Those were done with Marshall oils. They were manufactured around the 40s, and it was my dad's, and he still had his original oils. And I learned, not well, but I learned how to use them. And these are just some outtakes that didn't go in the book. This was a jazz band from 1978, World Saxophone Quartet. This goes back to the James Brown. This was what I got out of the photo shoot when I couldn't talk to him, where I could only shoot while he was doing the interview. So this was the one that we used, this was the one that ran, and then evidently I ran out and followed him afterwards. Let's see what else we got. Okay. Sun Ra. And I will confess, the only reason this is here is because I just love that Wonder Bread sandwich that he's holding in the back. And that's the beauty of just being your own editor. Okay, Wilson Pickett in the studio, 1980. Where are we? Ry Cooder. He would be the one all the way over on the right. 1980. So I got a little funky with the Ramones. Okay. And then remember I told you my Prince story? You know, that shy photographer who shot him, you know, horizontal, vertical, and 18 other ways, and then said, why don't you take a picture of me? So that is my photograph by Prince. This was something 1981. This is the Cube. That's in Astor Place. This was New Age musician, Bill Laswell. Got to put a little Rasta in there. Dennis Brown, 1981. Gil Evans, 1981. Andy West. He was one of the members of the Dixie Dregs, and this was all the rage. This was this new Steinberger bass. This was a publicity shoot, 1981. Dizzy Gillespie and Chaka Khan. She was singing on his song A Night in Tunisia. Laurie Anderson, 1983. Joe Cocker, 82. Hall & Oates, 82. I just love this shot. Pig Bag, 1982. Phil Lynott. There's a few more Madonna from that day. This was a short-lived band, Was Not Was. Charlie Hayden, 1983. This was the other shot where he's not doing a silent scream. Joey Ramone. Muta Baraka, 1983. This was my first, this is the Scorpions, 1984. This was the first time I'd ever shot in a studio where they had, you know, a psych. I just thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, and just encouraged them to play on it. I had no idea how you were supposed to use it. It just was there when I rented it. But it was AC/DC, publicity. Diane Lane showed up for my John Bon Jovi shoot. This was the first Farm Aid. Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Randy Newman. This was Howard Jones, 1985. Bob Geldorf. Band called the Divinals. Stuart Copeland, 1986. T-Bone Burnett, 87. This is Jerry Garcia, and I think some people would be disappointed that I didn't put this in the book. But for me, my book was a photo book. It wasn't, wow, was I lucky to have got that. I had a certain criteria, and for me, this shot didn't make it. I'm in focus, the light's exposed correctly, shot 4 frames. That wasn't enough for me, so this remains as an outtake. Lieber and Stoller, this was for Rolling Stone, 1987. They wrote the music and the lyrics to You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog and a bunch of other beautiful, beautiful songs from the 60s and the 70s. I think you say her name is Susie Sue, 1989. This is my very first shoot. She was just coming on the scene, Mariah Carey, 1990. And this was, again, some high-speed film. that I would use with tungsten and overexpose, and like 3 stops. So I was kind of playing with overexposure a little bit at that time. So it was tungsten lights with, I don't know what I did, but it was that high-speed film. And I also played with Polaroid, the Polograph film that Polaroid made, where you'd process it yourself. I don't know if anyone ever did it. You crank it through this machine they had. And so it was instant film, very fragile, very sensitive. You had to be really nice to it. And I played around with that. Same film, John Cale. So this is a Keith Richards that was very special to me, because after I finished shooting him with his album cover, I really felt like I hadn't shot anything for myself. So the crew was packing up, and I kind of sneaked around to another room and rushed back and asked permission if I could do one more shot. And that was that. And that was the magazine of him holding, that was the cover of him holding his record. So I guess the point, the little lesson in that is, don't forget yourself when you're shooting. You know, it's very easy if you're on assignment to fulfill the assignment and not come home with something for yourself. And that was a lesson for me, because it was a voice that said to me, you're not done yet. And even though they were packing up, I made them unpack, and we went back in there. So this was the start of it all. This was the man that I had moved to New York with. This was my first music photo that I ever took in 1977, when we were making our way over to the city from Boston. And then I have a little bit of fun stuff. So this was the letter I got from Musician Magazine. It says, as you can see, we like your photography. I hope you like their presentation. I'll be in New York this week and would like to quickly, I love that, quickly get together and look over your portfolio. And that became a 5-year relationship. This is me in my Village Voice days. I just think these are cute. I love this letter. I'll let you read it yourselves. Yeah. You know, but the funny thing is, having recently found this, is for those of you who don't know, John Dominus was a very famous Life magazine photographer who recently passed away. And in '87, he became the photo editor of People, but I guess I don't get discouraged easily. That was my blue box that I stood on. That was my first calling card. And those are some Polaroids of me that basically show me with different hairdos, but you know, and those in Polaroids, I used to have walls and walls of these when you walked into my studio, which was a great icebreaker. And probably a really great time to say, someone else talk now. Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.